Hi, everybody. Welcome back to yet another edition of Jason's Weather School. I'm meteorologist Jason Fraser from the NBC affiliate here in Cleveland, Ohio, and this is our Tsunami. As always, I'd like to start off with something funny. So, my first question for today is how does a hurricane see? All right. All right, here we go with the joke. Three, two, one. With its eye. Get it? Hurricane has an eye. All right. I was really excited about that. I don't know if you were, but I was. So, as always, I love your questions, comments, concerns. Feel free to email me, jfrazer@wkyc.com, or you can always leave me a message right below this video. All right, so here is today's outline. We are going to be talking about tsunamis. What exactly are they? How do they form? And what should you do if you see a tsunami? So a lot of people are used to seeing tsunamis in movies, but they do happen not only here in the United States, but across the world. And a tsunami is basically a series of very tall waves that send water inland and cause a lot of damage. Now, the name tsunami is actually Japanese, and when this wave of water crashes ashore, it usually will recede out to sea, bringing a lot of debris with it. So, we're talking about cars, we're talking, unfortunately, in some cases, people's homes, buildings, you name it, anything on land will likely end up of the sea. Now, the interesting thing about tsunamis are how they form and what the components are of a tsunami. So let's talk a little bit about the waves first. So the waves can travel up to about 600 miles per hour. That is really fast. Think of a plane that usually travels at about 450 miles per hour, regular plane, 747 that you usually are on. So it travels faster than that. The wave heights can also be up to 100 feet high. That is really high. All right, if you were on the ground and you looked all the way up, you probably would still potentially be overcome by its height. And that is the reason why detection and alertness are key. Usually, people only have about a minute or so between actually seeing the wave come ashore and it actually coming ashore. So here are a couple of misconceptions about tsunamis. And when I say misconceptions, I'm really referring to things that people think about tsunamis, but aren't actually true. So people think that you can surf on a tsunami. That is not true. Because the waves are really, 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 really high, it's really dangerous. And on top of it, tsunamis literally, maybe you don't even see it come from the middle of the sea. So, how can you surf on it? Tsunamis only strike once is another misconception. We actually have seen a number of cases where tsunamis happen potentially two, three, or even four times, and it's all from the same either earthquake or volcanic eruption. Now, that brings me to the third misconception that all tsunamis are created by earthquakes. That is not true. And we're going to get into what causes those tsunamis in a second. The last one is tsunamis are caused by big storms like hurricanes, or in this particular part of the world where they happen a lot, typhoons. That is also not true as well. Usually, with hurricanes, you'll actually see the water go from the ocean on the land and then it usually stays there. Whereas with tsunamis, you'll actually see the water moving the land and then it'll eventually recede. Now, for coastal areas where you do get that flooding during hurricanes, eventually the water will evaporate, and in some cases, it does actually recede, but it usually takes some time. And with tsunamis, they're usually right away. So that brings up the question, what exactly causes tsunamis? So tsunamis are actually caused by a couple of different things. So earthquakes are where the large majority of them are caused by that, right? So 72% of them are. So basically that means that if you had four tsunamis, about three out of those four tsunamis are actually caused by earthquakes. We do have tsunamis that are caused by landslides. That's basically when you have some debris that's on a side of a mountain, maybe it's mud, maybe it's water, and all of that stuff ends up coming down the mountain. You can have volcanoes that cause these tsunamis. So there's a lot, remember we talked about it yesterday, where there are a lot of volcanoes that are underground. And what happens is all of those hurricanes, or I should say those volcanoes, they end up pushing up a lot of energy because they're on the surface of the ocean, and that energy has to go somewhere. And it usually goes up and it forces those waves to move forward. The atmosphere, so there have been situations where an asteroid has hit the water and it's caused tsunami. And you might be thinking, what? How is that possible? Well, think about it, right? If I were to take some water, put it into this glass here, and then if I was to actually drop the cap in the middle of the glass, what would happen? It would start moving. And that's exactly what happens on a much bigger level in the middle of the ocean. The other thing that causes tsunamis, well, sometimes we aren't really sure. That's about 11% of the cases. So if you had 10 tsunamis, only one of them out of the 10 tsunamis, we may not even know how it started. So remember I said that most tsunamis are caused by earthquakes, all right? And those earthquakes, if you remember during my previous lesson, some of them are due to tectonic plates, all right? The tectonic plates, they end up hitting each other. One of those plates ends up going up, the other one goes down, and that energy has to go somewhere, right? Because again, whenever you push down on something, eventually that means something else has to go up. So what you'll notice here in this diagram here is with the tectonic plates, one of the plates moves upward, right? The other one moves downward. Well, what happens eventually is that energy, because of that, gets shifted upwards. It gets shifted way up here. Now, what ends up happening, right? Well, you tend to have calm waves here, but because the water is being pushed upwards like this, well, that's going to end up creating a wave. Well, because that energy continues to be pushed upward, you're going to get a series of waves, and then they keep building and building. Now, what happens usually is in the middle of the ocean, you'll have the seafloor be really, really, really deep. I mean, we're talking 100, 200 feet, right? So again, all that energy gets pushed up. But as those waves get closer and closer to the shoreline where you and I live, that's part of the reason why we start to see those waves build up and up. Because again, all of that energy is being pushed upward and then this way. So that's why sometimes you will see tsunamis that are 20 feet, 30 feet large. It's really big. All right. The other thing that I cannot implore upon you enough to know is tsunamis can happen multiple times from either one earthquake or I'll say an earthquake and then an aftershock. Remember, we had said that an aftershock usually happens after the main earthquake. Okay. So this is why it is so important that even when, if you get caught up in a tsunami and hopefully you're safe, and you think, okay, things are good, things are okay, I can now go out. No, you should always wait for a person of authority to tell you to go out because those waves can go back out to sea and then several within either minutes or sometimes several hours later, you can have another tsunami hit. And that is so that's why it's so important that a lot of these places, particularly California, Hawaii, and some other places, they have invested millions of dollars in a way to detect and alert people. So you might be wondering, where do tsunamis happen? Can they happen here in the United States, even here in Ohio? So the short answer is yes, they can happen here in the United States, and they can happen here in Ohio. Now, they don't happen as often as they do in other parts of the world, but think about it. Remember, I said that tsunamis are caused by either earthquakes, volcanic activity, or some asteroids, right? So we can get some asteroids here in Ohio. We can also get some earthquakes too, but it's pretty rare to have a tsunami here. Now, in California, as you can see, and in other parts of the world, also known as the Ring of Fire, it actually happens more often. And if you remember where I said the Ring of Fire was, it's in the Pacific Ocean, right? So it is all these countries that you see right along here where this Ring of Fire is, all right? So that includes China, Japan, Indonesia. That also includes parts of the United States, including Alaska and California. Now, again, the reason why the tsunamis happen here is because of those earthquakes and volcanoes. That is where you get the majority of tsunamis. Now, if you're like me and you're wondering, so what was the biggest tsunami ever recorded? Well, that happened on July 9th, 1958, way before many of us were born, in Alaska. What happened was there was a 7.8 magnitude earthquake, and that had triggered off a landslide. And that landslide ended up producing a major tsunami that, according to scientists, was 1,720 feet long, or I should say big. Whoo, that was huge, right? Now, fortunately, it did not cause a lot of major damage to homes because this was in a very remote place. However, there were a couple of trees that were down. There were a number of trees, I should say, that were down. And as you can imagine, it did cause a fair amount of damage. Now, the deadliest tsunami actually happened a couple of years ago, back on December 6th, or I should say December 26, 2004. It was centered right around Indonesia, but places like Sri Lanka, India, and Thailand were also impacted by this. Some people refer to this as the Boxing Day tsunami because it happened the day after Christmas. Now, there was a 9.1 magnitude earthquake, and that had major ripple effects across much of Asia. And unfortunately, about 230,000 people died. They just didn't see it coming. It happened, and then within minutes, there was a massive tsunami that had impacted that. It is part of the reason why many countries have invested in tsunami warning centers. They are all over the world. They include the Philippines, Indonesia, Australia, Japan, and even here in the United States. And if for some reason there is some either a volcanic activity or an earthquake, what happens is usually these centers are in charge of sending out those warnings, either via text message, via email. In some places, there are sirens that go off. So these people who work in these centers really play a critical role in saving lives. Now they use satellites as well as some underwater monitoring devices. One of them, it was actually pretty cool to learn about because if you can imagine, there's a buoy, right? So the buoy goes back and forth in water. Well, what happens is it actually has a little, I'll just call it weight at the bottom of it. And if that weight moves, it'll send a signal to the top of the buoy. And one of these warning centers will get it, and then they will try to warn as many people as possible. Again, their mission is to alert as many people as quickly as possible. So let's say you're traveling in Asia, or maybe you might even be in California, and you get one of these tsunami warnings, or maybe you see one actually coming to you. What should you do? So you cannot outrun a tsunami. All right, remember, tsunamis are traveling at about 600 miles per hour. I don't know about you, I can't run that fast. And I don't even think there's anybody human who can run that fast. So if you feel the ground shaking and you're near water, the best thing that you can do as quickly as possible is to move to either a hill or mountain or someplace that is on high. Make sure before you travel to California or places that usually do get tsunamis, make sure that you or your parent has signed up for some type of warning on your phone or a computer because you want to be aware of any tsunamis that are happening as quickly as possible. The other thing is if you are inside of a building, all right, hopefully it is a metal or concrete building, okay? But you want to try your best to get to at least the fourth floor. And that is the reason why is because usually these tsunamis, usually they are larger waves, right? but usually if you're on the fourth floor, you're pretty safe. The higher the floor, the better. If it's a building that has 20 floors, well, I would try as quickly as possible to get to the 20th floor. And also try not to go outside immediately after. All right. I know that people tend to do this a lot where there's a tsunami that happens, there's water on the ground. The first thing they'll do is, once they realize that the water's already inland and it's still, is to go outside and figure out what's going on. That is the worst thing you can do. The reason why, two reasons, I should say. One is because at some point that water is going to recede. And when that water starts pulling back towards the ocean, right, what's going to end up happening is it's going to start pulling all sorts of things with it. So anything that's in the water, whether it is a car, whether it is a tree branch, a piece of a building, it's going to end up in the middle of the ocean. And I don't want any of that to hit you. All right. The other thing is, we don't know if there may potentially be another tsunami that's coming after. Because remember, what did I say causes most tsunamis? Earthquakes. Sometimes there's an aftershock right away, and that'll trigger off another tsunami. So I'm going to stop there. I've covered a lot. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns about tsunamis, please let me know. Our next lesson is going to be on Monday, April the 22nd or April the 27th at 9 a.m. We're going to be talking about thunderstorms. And did you know that there are actually several types of thunderstorms? We're going to talk a little bit about what makes some thunderstorms more dangerous than others. There's things called multi-cell thunderstorms and single cell thunderstorms, stuff to talk about. All right, as always, questions, let me know what you think or what's going on, or if you have just a suggestion on how to improve these. I'd love to hear from you. You can hit me up on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or as well as Snapchat at Jason Fraser TV, or you can always send me an email at jfraser@wkyc.com. Hope that you have a lovely day, and I'll see you soon.